an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Broadchurch, Season 2, Episode 8. In this episode, we finally get the verdict, and we find out what really happened to Pippa. I have mixed feelings on this episode. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Lindsey for commissioning this episode. What's up, Lindsey, if you're out there? It's really, I think, pretty telling as to how all of you feel about this show, that in the first season, I was having a lot of people in the chats, people going back and forth with each other. And in the second season, the audience participation has gone down significantly. And I do not think that that is an accident. It's the kind of thing that and a lot of people have said this about the third season, and that's part of why it wasn't commissioned, is that they just didn't finish. And I think that's one of those things that is, it can happen a lot, where it's not that things are bad. It's simply that you don't have the urgency about watching the next one that you used to have. And I had that myself covering this season, where in the first season, as soon as I finished recording on an episode, I would go and watch the next episode right away. In some cases, I would even, though I had another recording coming up, and so my break wasn't long enough to finish, I would still start an episode and stop halfway through because I was just so eager to see what would happen. And the second season just did not carry that same energy for me. It did initially, and I understood what they were doing with the deciding that they were going to have the trial regarding the first case go on. But I think that overall, because of that, this final episode wasn't as satisfying to me. I say that with the full acknowledgement of it's really going to be difficult every time that you have such a compelling first season to match that. And also, it's not like I hated it. And I will say I really appreciated what they decided to do regarding handling Joe. But overall, this was not what I wanted it to be. And it's a shame whenever you watch something that is so good to start off with, because you know what the writers have, that they are able to really hit the mark sometimes. But this just didn't do it for me. So I had said at the end of the last episode how frustrating it was to just get, that very predictable cut before the next episode regarding the sentencing. And I stand by that. It just didn't, it felt a lot more cheap than it did. That said, I did appreciate that you get the sentence right away at the start of the next episode. I sort of wondered if we were going to draw it out. Maybe even if the camera was going to go somewhere else and then come back to the trial. And I was just not interested, But thankfully they don't do that. However, he is found not guilty. And it is genuinely a moment of feeling like you've been punched in the stomach. The reaction of everybody in the room is right on the money. They are disgusted. The only people celebrating are his lawyers. And there is just such a sense of devastation. I really appreciated Chloe, who is completely cracking at that point. And I was shocked. I won't lie to you guys. It's not like it never occurred to me that they would find him not guilty. I thought about it, but I just didn't really see what the story would be if they found him not guilty. I was like, well, then what's the point of all this, And it turns out that it's the one thing that actually lands. Because when I've talked about the shortcomings of this season, a major factor has been there's no real connection to the characters involved in the Sandbrook murders. So you don't have that emotional component. And what worked so well in the first season is watching the way that this murder tears this community apart. And how compelling it is to see the ways in which a small town either can, band together and help one another get through something, or they can tear each other apart and it results in a man's suicide. And the fact is that they took it back around and they had Joe found not guilty, but then they had a similar, revisiting of that town and their reaction to stuff. And they decided to have them handle him. And I'm just going to talk about everything that goes on with Joe here. I find what they decided to do with Joe as a character, the writers, really compelling. Because Joe he is in such denial. He has fully deluded himself. Not only into not really seeing himself as responsible for this kid's death, but also he sees himself as persecuted unfairly by the rest of the town in a way that is truly astonishing. And there are people out there like this who just they are so unwilling to take responsibility. And you are like, how do you live with yourself? And the way that they live with themselves is they create a whole different reality to occupy. That's how they do it. And I really wonder what the writers drew from in regard to him. Because I feel like there has to be something very specific that they saw or heard about, maybe from law enforcement or if there was a case. Because the fact is that this man gets found not guilty against all odds. Really, it's... Alec has this moment of screaming about 12 idiots can completely ruin someone's life about the jury, and I can't help but agree. The story that the defense made up is so absurd and so full of holes. And there were any number of fucking opportunities for the prosecution to punch holes in it, and they didn't do it. That I'm just disgusted. But sure, he's found not guilty. I'm assuming once he's found not guilty that he will just fade into the shadows, because that's what a sane person would do. You get accused of this kind of crime, you know you did it too. Does he not think anymore that he did it? Because there is something about him that feels like a moment occurred while he was in jail where he turned a corner and decided he was no longer guilty. It was like something, somebody said something, or I don't know what, but it really feels like Joe no longer believes that he killed this child. Really, truly doesn't believe he did it. And I really want to know what the fuck happened, where that came from. So because he seems to really in his head not feel that he is responsible, he is about to try and reintegrate himself back into Broadchurch, which is mind-blowing. The fact that he would ever even consider coming back to the town. I was just I presented that as a potential option last episode, where I was if he doesn't come back, then what happens? He comes back to Broadchurch and just tries to live. And I was I don't see it. Nobody would allow that. That community is too tightly knit to allow something like that. And it turns out I was right. It was just it was a lot more direct than I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be this drawn out sort of, we're going to eventually make it so clear that none of us are willing to deal with him, that he will leave of his own volition. But they decide that they are going to be a lot more hands-on than that, which I approve of, because frankly, the man is so deluded that I don't trust that anything they were going to attempt, if it weren't direct, would ever sink in. He just has lost his connection with reality. So the first thing he does is he goes to Paul. He goes to the priest. And I honestly, again, with the delusion, he thinks that the fact that he was found not guilty is all that Paul is going to need to, like, let go of this whole thing, which is really just, it just shows how completely he is missing the point, you know, with Paul refusing to come and see him anymore. He really, truly thinks that being found not guilty means that Paul doesn't have a leg to stand on in refusing to help him anymore. Like, we didn't hear your confession. We don't know. We know what you did, dude. Like I said, I am so curious if there is a real life inspiration for Joe's behavior here, because I have to imagine that that's almost like a bit of a protective measure that your brain might take if you did something so horrific that you can't cope with it, is that it turns around the story in your mind, because you sort of are so on a fundamental level reject the truth that maybe that it's sort of like trauma, you know, where you maybe don't remember it if it happens to you while you're young enough, or, you know, there are people who it happens to while they're adults and their mind just like sort of cuts out part of the memory of what happened to them as a precaution for their future mental health. Is that something that our minds would do if it's a thing that we committed versus something that happened to us? Like, I'm curious about it, but a part of me feels like that's a cheat. That feels unfair if you're able to do that. But it would answer the question of how people can live with themselves after they do something if they're not just a psychopath. You know, a psychopath, that's something that at the very least I can understand. Oh, they don't have to worry about living with themselves. It's simply not a priority. Like, they don't feel any contrition or guilt over it in the first place. So it's just not an issue. But this is a whole other beast, man. This is just so upsetting. So anyway, like I said, he goes to Paul, who rightfully is just horrified that this guy would think he has any interest in dealing with him at all, and tells him, I was found not guilty. You have to help me get my life back, I think is what he says. Again, what? So here comes Paul, and he, first of all, he calls up his girlfriend, Becca is her name, I think, right? And tells her, this is why he came, this is what he expects me to do. And she asks, why did you call me here? And he says, because I need someone else to know what I'm going to do. And I really thought, is Paul about to kill a motherfucker? Like, I didn't really think that, but I wondered. I mean, there's only so many ways to take that kind of statement, you know? And at the same time, we have Beth and Mark, who are sitting together talking about what the hell they're going to do now. And Mark says, there's really only one option. I just don't know how we do it. And of course, it sounds like we're going to kill this motherfucker. We'll take justice into our own hands. They weren't able to provide justice for us, so we'll do it. And I'll be honest, you guys, I really didn't have much of a problem with it. Okay? Like, it's the sort of thing that when we're talking about capital punishment, we have systemic racism involved, we have inequity, we have lack of resources to get sufficient defense, all of these other issues that cause me to not be behind capital punishment and the death penalty. But when we're talking about a group of people who spoke one-on-one with this man, who confessed to them what he did, I can't feel the same way about it. This man committed this murder, was able to sleep totally soundly at night. We saw many times how other people were laying awake and he wasn't. Behaved in such a way as to fool even me, a viewer, into thinking that he was just such a good-hearted man. And then he actually confessed. When Mark came and talked to him, he told him what happened. They know for sure. There's no doubt. This isn't the same kind of situation. So when they decide that they are going to take matters into their own hands, and I'm thinking it's a murder, it just feels like justice. It just does, you know? And like, I'm not necessarily proud of that. I recognize that I can be very cavalier about violence and my concern for things. That's just who I am. And I don't know how I'd feel if it were a real situation in life. I have a hard time thinking that I wouldn't feel the same way. But again, in a real life situation, I would only be able to feel this way if I had personally, firsthand, heard the confession, the way that you do when you're watching this show, you know? So Mark's talking this way, and Beth doesn't like argue with him or put up a fight, really, and that was what got me sort of thinking, like, if he's going to do this, that's interesting that Beth seems to be, she's not fighting him on it. And I wasn't sure if she knew what he meant. I'm still not sure. When he says, I just don't know how to do it, we have to get justice for ourselves if they won't give it to us, there's no indication that she has had this conversation with Mark before and knows what it is that he's referring to. It just could be that she thinks that he's talking about murder as well. And she also doesn't have an issue with it, which frankly, I'm sort of interested in, like exploring the reaction she would have had. And maybe that's what led to them coming to this arrangement. I'm wondering if Mark did mean, I'm going to kill this motherfucker. And she was like, no. Because that's what she winds up saying later when she's, confronts Joe in the shack. We could kill you and bury you and nobody would mourn you and nobody would even notice. But we are not going to let you do that to us. And it was just one of those moments for me where I was like, I completely understand what you're saying. I don't disagree. I actually think that this method is much more elegant. But I really wonder, did she stop Mark from doing something a lot more drastic? Was she like, okay, look, I get it. And I'm not even like mad at you for wanting to do this, but we can't do that. We're going to have to figure out another way. Was she the voice of reason, or was this what Mark meant to begin with? So I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but Joe gets left in the sanctuary by himself. He doesn't really seem to question what's going on here because, again, he is just so deep in his delusion at this point, and therefore just doesn't seem to understand the danger that he's actually in. And he hears the doors opening and he calls out, Paul? And no, it's not Paul. It's Mark and, is it Nigel, right? Nige. And it's understandable. Joe completely panics because he just assumes they're going to kill him, which why wouldn't you? Frankly, you deserve it. So, and you deserve it really in your heart. So they take him to the hut on the hill by the beach, the murder scene. Very poetic. I approve of this. Where Beth and Ellie are both waiting for him. I would like to reiterate my disappointment in the way the show handled their, what's the word I want? Reconciliation, I guess. I was very invested in Beth understanding Ellie's situation finally and really like realizing how much Ellie has also been suffering and them beginning to team up once again. And it just feels like the show didn't actually give us that moment. And if I missed it, I apologize. If there are people out there listening to this who are like, no, they did. What are you talking about? I must have missed it because I was waiting for it. And it just feels like we transitioned pretty quickly into Ellie being willing to, Beth being willing to accept Ellie's comforting of her and talking to her about what's going on. And I just didn't see the moment where Beth stepped back and was like, oh, you really didn't know, did you? I wanted there to be a genuine conversation. And I don't know, maybe that's like not how life is. Maybe that's the point, is that they didn't show that moment because we don't often get that kind of moment in reality. But it was a bit jarring to me how they were suddenly friends again. And I just wish that we had gotten to see that because it was something that was important to me. And considering how light this season was on relationships that I was truly invested in, I feel a little bit robbed that they had this potential to do something really interesting and they just didn't. I don't really understand why they squandered that. And I'm curious if there's anybody else who feels the same way about it. But yeah, Ellie is in there as well with Beth. And they sit Joe down, and there's this whole thing with him, like, starting to apologize. And I really appreciated, she, like, interrupts him. And it's like, first of all, you don't get to say jack shit. And he tries to say that he's sorry. And Ellie screams at him and says, shut the fuck up, you piece of shit. You aren't sorry. If you were sorry, you would have taken responsibility for what you did. You would have pled guilty. And her acting in this moment, I just love this so much, you guys. It's so good. I'm going to read part of what Beth actually says to him. We could kill you in here. Dump your body on a beach. And no one would care. No one would notice. And he's like cowering because he really thinks maybe they will. But we're more than you. I will not be broken by this. We all get to live. But you have no life left. Not here. And this is when he starts to say, I was found innocent. And Ellie snaps. Shut up, you piece of shit. He says, I'm sorry. You're not sorry. If you were sorry, you would have pleaded guilty. And you are leaving. You're never coming back. You will never see either of your children again. He says, you can't do that. And she says, oh, I can do that. And you see in her face, she is for realsies. For 100% realsies. If you try and see them, if you follow them, if you go to their schools, if you contact them in any way, I will kill you. And she means that shit. And unlike you, I will face the consequences. And he is looking at her with such rage. And it's truly like, again, you murdered a child. Why do you think you get to be around your kids, dude? What in the fucking hell are you, what world are you living in? What do you, you are dead to us. Do you understand? And he just looks at her with such hatred. And I have to imagine that this comes back up next season. I really don't want it to come back up. But he just has this vibe to him like he hasn't given up even here. So at this point, Mark says, now you're coming with us, and grabs him by the arm and takes him outside. And Paul tells him, your bags are in the cab. It'll take you to Bournemouth train station. I have gotten in contact with a friend of mine who'll meet you there. Make sure you get on the train to Sheffield. I've got you into a halfway house, and from there, you're on your own. And they lead him down, and this moment is really beautiful because practically every major player in the town from the show is here and are all witnessing him being sent off. Can I tell you guys, when they first bring him to the hut on the beach and Father Paul is standing there and steps out of the hut, the look of like righteous anger on his face was very sobering. I truly had a moment of like, oh my God, they are going to kill him. He looked really scary for that moment. I genuinely had like a bit of a like, oh God. But yeah, he continues to have that sort of expression as he follows Joe. And Joe just looks so like baffled. He really didn't think that there were going to be any consequences. He figured the trial says that I'm not guilty and everybody has to accept that and we'll just keep like living our lives. Like, sweetie, oh my God. And he walks by Mark at one point and says to him, you think you can just banish me? And Mark doesn't even like try to spar with him. He just says, we're sure of it, Joe. That's it. We're sure of it. And Ellie is the one who opens the car door for him, you know, in this beautiful sort of moment of closure and finality. Her being the one to be like, get the fuck out of here. I just loved it. I really did. This was like, to me, the ultimate ending for this storyline. Everybody gathering together and agreeing that they are going to hold this motherfucker responsible. And I thought that this was really well done. And where we go from there, which I thought was interesting, but it made sense, was a scene with, and this is the final scene of the episode, or no, my bad. The last scene is Alec deciding whether he's going to leave town, which of course he doesn't because we know there's a third season. But we have, first of all, the scene with the Latimer family on the beach, and they're putting down flowers where Danny's body was found. But Mark is talking to the baby. I can't... What's the baby's name? Lizzie, I think he said. And he's saying, we can't never come here. We can't miss out, not on somewhere this beautiful. But we lost your brother here. And he would have loved you. And it's a really beautiful sort of like, we can't pretend this never happened and just avoid this place. We have to keep living our lives and take that reality in with everything else and have it coexist. And that's a really difficult life lesson. You know, we as human beings are very fond of absolutes on one end of a spectrum or another. And it can be really difficult for us to like cope with the fact that something can be incredibly painful and still have been good for us. Or something could have been really horrific. And yet we still have warm memories related to all of it, you know. Losing Danny the way they did is just the worst nightmare scenario. But they also have so much good that they experienced with him. And you can't just like decide to never think about Danny again. 'Cause what's the point of that? What do you get out of that? So I just really loved this, and I appreciated so much when Ellie turns up with Tom and Freddie, and they're having this like lovely day all together that means that they have made up and are going to continue to move forward as a community and still be there for one another. And Joe wasn't able to completely tear them apart, which is a really hopeful ending and something that I wasn't sure we were going to get. I wasn't sure what message the show was going to decide to leave us with here. So I really liked that. And it, like I said, I just really wish that I had gotten to see the moment where Ellie and Beth had made up. So what we do here is we're going to back up and we're going to talk about Sandbrook. this is one of those, again, I really stand by what I said, you guys, which is that I don't care at this point. It's too bad. I don't want to feel this way about it, but I do. I just don't feel like this came together for me. So by the time we get the big reveal on what actually happened that night, everybody sucks. Everybody is complicit in everything else. Nobody's hands are clean. And there's nobody that was actually innocent except Pippa. And thus, it makes my, like, personal interest in the story plummet completely. Combined with the fact that I didn't really like Claire anyway. You know, I was sort of wondering about her initially, but I pretty quickly turned a corner and was like, this bitch is crazy. I don't think so. And that's just how I go on feeling. So at the end of the trial, after Joe is found innocent or not guilty, we have this moment of Alec coming up to Ellie, and she is understandably about to fucking just unleash this rage. And he tells her, that feeling that you're feeling is how I woke up every day for like the last 2 years. And she tells him, don't you dare tell me to just let go of this. And he says, let go of it? No. Oh my God, no, I want you to stoke it. That's what we need. He may have been found not guilty, but we have this other case and we can nail these motherfuckers to the wall. So we may not get the murderer, but we can get a murderer. And if you'll bring that energy to this, let's get started. And that's what they do. Right after the sentencing, she grabs Claire and tells her that she's going to be arrested in connection with the murder. And they take her to a interrogation room, and she does the thing that I was sort of wondering about. And this is why I was worried that Alec had slept with her. Because I had a feeling that if he had, she would use that shit. Because she's obviously really good at manipulation. I mean, we see how quickly she snaps to figuring out exactly how to handle this murder once everything begins to go down in that flashback. So I was like, I wouldn't have been surprised if Alex slept with her, because his wife had just cheated on him, and there's this woman who's really vulnerable, who seems on the outside to be like innocent of everything, that he can feel very protective of. If he had slept with her, I wouldn't even have really been mad at him for it. It just would have been an unwise move for sure. But what happens here is they begin recording the interrogation, and she asks him how he could violate her trust and tell Lee that she had been pregnant and that she had the abortion. And he says, oh, you want to talk about trust? And brings up the girls. And he asks whether or not she was grooming, is it Lizzie? The girl, the older one, for Lee. And she comes back with, why did you force me to have sex with you, Alec? And I was so disappointed in Ellie's reaction here, because she immediately starts to wonder if this is true. And look, I want to believe women, and I do. But you can't have gotten to know this bitch at all and take that shit seriously. And you can't have thought that Alec would put himself in that position at this point. Like, after seeing the way everything went down with the trial, if he had slept with Claire, I feel like that he would have confessed to it, for lack of a better word, to Ellie at this point, because he would be aware that would be a major liability. It's just, there's no way for that to not get mentioned at this point. considering how they have seen anything can get like picked up and smeared. So Ellie starts to be like, well, we have to take these allegations seriously. I'm going to turn the tape off. She says, why have you been holding me against my will, Alec? And Ellie asks, is there any truth to this? Of course there bloody isn't. And she says, you hurt me physically, Alec. I know you were sad because your wife had another man's cock in her mouth, but you shouldn't have forced me to have sex with you. And Ellie starts to turn it off, and he screams at her. And then says to Claire, all right, do you want to report that? Is that what you want to do? Because we can do that, and I'll be arrested. Do you want that? And as he says that, you can see her sort of smugness drop. She was feeling herself for a second there. She really thought that she like had him against the ropes. And he called her bluff pretty much immediately. And I really appreciated it. He knows who he's dealing with at this point. He has figured it out. And she can't have him be arrested because the whole point of what she's doing is to get Lee on the hook. She needs Lee to be pulled into this so that he knows she is willing to put herself on the line and get him in trouble so that he can be forced to coexist with her. And probably because she is still a little bit like hooked on him. I think that when she was telling Ellie about that she was being more honest than I thought. Because remember, guys, I wasn't sure what to think. I really didn't know if her claims that he's just like a drug that I can't quit, it's the sort of thing that I'm like, okay, that is a thing that happens. I have been in relationships like that myself. I think a lot of people have, where it's like, I know that this is like actually really unhealthy and toxic, but the sex is amazing. And I can't seem to like find the willpower to say no to this person anymore. And I was sort of really straddling that line between, is that what it is? Or is she just manipulating Lee completely? I wasn't sure if Lee even really knew the truth about what happened. There was always this sort of sense between the two of them that they were in on a thing together and they were both keeping secrets. But Claire is so, like, she just seemed so snaky that I wasn't even trusting that Lee was fully aware of the whole situation either. And once you see how it all goes down, it definitely feels like, obviously, Lee murders a child. So Lee is by no means an innocent here. But she has the clarity of thought in the midst of it. He feels much more like a frightened child. And she's managing him. So my sort of theory about maybe he doesn't even actually have the info he needs either, it turns out that there was a tiny bit of merit to it. It wasn't what I thought. And it does seem like she's desperately clinging to this relationship. I feel like this move that she's making here is meant to be a scare tactic for him. I don't know that she intended for everybody to just confess and for it to go down the way it does. I don't know. I think that she thought she could do that and then freak Alec out with this like accusation here and get him to retract everything. I don't know. And yeah, this is his assessment. He says, so what are you thinking? We bring Lee in. He gets a fright seeing that. And instead of betraying you, you're banking on him realizing that he needs to stay close to you because of what you know. And she laughs and says, I don't know anything. And it's a really amazing moment of acting from her. Like, and I don't mean the actress, I mean like Claire. Because there is a sense of genuine, I can't believe that you think this is how it is. It turns out Alec is completely right. But she's just a really good actor. And Ellie, you can see in the scene, when she reacts this way to his suggestion, Ellie doesn't seem to know what to make of it. You know, she just doesn't, like, she clearly isn't as certain about this as Alec is. And I have to imagine That's partially because of Alec's involvement in this case for as long as he was involved. But also, there's an element at this point that I find interesting of Ellie being willing to consider that maybe what Claire is saying about Alec is true. Because, reminder guys, in the first season, when it's even suggested that maybe Mark killed his own son, Ellie is indignant about it. She is insulted. Like, she just finds it, she knows this guy and she knows he would never do that. And clearly that sense of trust from her is gone at this point, where she has grown to realize you just don't know what people are capable of, not really. So the suggestion that maybe he like kept her against her will and raped her, even though it's somebody that she has grown to trust and confide in to a degree, she's still not really like, it's not outside of the realm of possibility for her. That's some interesting growth. And it's sort of sad, you know, because like there is something to be said for having perfect faith in people, that I'm sure it's comforting, but she's a cop, first of all. So that's not a great quality if you're in fucking law enforcement. But also, I do think that more people should feel this way, that you have to be aware that folks are capable of shit you would never have imagined, you know, and it's just, you're just fooling yourself if you think that you know with certainty how everyone in your life would react to any given situation. That's just not, you shouldn't believe that you know, because the likelihood of you being right about that, the likelihood of you being able to predict any given situation is just so low. So anyway, I found this whole moment to be very compelling because of what it says about Ellie. And despite it all, the whole thing, like later on, where Alec is talking to Lee and he says, we're all alone in the world. Sorry guys, did you hear that thunder? Damn. But he says, we're all alone and you really can't count on anybody. She tells Alec later that she like doesn't think that he's right about that. And so Ellie is still holding on to, there are some people you can trust, but nevertheless, there is a little bit of the like, but you never know though, you know, still in there for her. So I don't know. I'm debating, guys, like, cause like I said, season 3 hasn't been commissioned. People just didn't really love it. And based on what happens this episode, I can understand why, cause I'll just double back and talk about this briefly. We have the moment with Jocelyn, and she is just like devastated at the fact that she failed the town, or so she sees it. Just this really public failure, especially considering that she had been out of it. And now she like has made her comeback, but to a failure. And she just can't end on a failure. Not like that. So she decides that she is going to pick up Sharon's son's file. And guys, I think I'm probably going to put on the 3rd season just to see, but I cannot see myself getting invested in what happens to her kid when she seems so shitty. You know, she actively assisted in getting a child killer off. And we have a brief moment after the trial when she's talking to Jocelyn about it. And she says, you know, I can't stand the way that y'all try and act like this profession is some sort of noble thing. It's street fighting in wigs, is what she says. And that the law is corrupted and bullshit. And we're trying to act like we stand for something when really we're all just in here getting our hands as dirty as anybody. Now look, I completely understand feeling that way, especially as a black woman. Like, I can only imagine the shit that she has seen, and I can only imagine what has led to her son being in prison, because we still don't know anything about what's going on with him. But the show made a really big mistake for me in making her as unlikable as they have. Because, and this is such a like, I hate to say the word unlikable because, especially considering it's a woman character and a black woman, it feels like I'm really falling into that. There's just something I don't like about her. I can't put my finger on it. It's like, oh, you're a racist misogynist. It's fine. But I don't think anybody would disagree with me on this. She has been portrayed as somebody who is willing to do whatever it takes, regardless of any inkling of the truth. She knows this man confessed, and she's still taking this case. She's still willing to let this guy back out into the world. That's just a fundamental lack of morality for me that I can't get behind. And it's the sort of thing that I don't know if I can ever get past that in terms of character shit. You know, if the third season there were to be a resurgence of evidence of something new, and she decided that she was suddenly going to take on the appeal for Joe's imprisonment, but as a prosecutor, because she realized that maybe there was something to the law, and she decided that she was going to go in on the offensive this time because he was clearly guilty, then maybe. If she, basically what I'm saying is, if she like made up for this mistake and undid it and had him actually sent to prison, then maybe. The only way around this that I can see is if I grew to really care about her son. And that would be a tricky thing to make me do in a season when I'm predisposed to not like him because of his mother. And the couple of scenes I have seen with him, he just seemed really petulant towards her, expecting her to fix everything for him. And I didn't really get a sense of him as a person. There was nothing truly sympathetic about him, except for the fact that she doesn't think that he should be here, evidently. But I don't know whether to take her word on that or not. I don't know what happened. I don't know how much she really knows about what happened. Does she only know what her son told her? I have nothing to go on. And because of that, I'm entering into this idea of Jocelyn is teaming up now with Sharon, and they're both going to work on getting her son out. I think there's room for an appeal. Don't care. I just don't. And I wish I did. I wish they hadn't played it this way. I think that all it would have taken would have been seeing moments of doubt from Sharon. Because there's the moment where her aide, Fleabag, is like, oh my God, he fucking did it. And she's like, you can't talk like that. I really would have liked it if there had been a feeling to her of like, yeah, he really did fucking do it. Oh, God. You know, and it feeling like there was any conflict in her at all about it. But there isn't any. She really seems to be perfectly fine with letting a man who she seems to be fully aware of being a child killer going free. And I don't know how I'm supposed to give a shit now. So I just wanted to double back and talk about that because it's going to be like the setup for part of what's going on next season. I think, you know, maybe not. It would be hilarious if they just dropped all of that. And yeah, so, all right, I got off track, but I figured I better double back and talk about that. So, okay, the questioning with Claire. And this is the point where he kind of gets aggressive. You know what happened to Lisa Newberry and Pippa Gillespie. And she gets very serious and says, you're wrong. And he says, I don't think I am. Now when I look in your eyes. And she says, I'm not scared of you. And he says, yeah, you should be, though. And it's an interesting moment because I don't know what she's trying to accomplish by saying, I'm not scared of you. But when him saying you should be, she looks genuinely startled that that's his response. Like, I'm wondering if she's sort of trying to sense whether or not there's still some give in him, because he was on her side, sort of, for such a while there, or at least it seemed like that to her. This is when Ellie pipes up. Why have you got Ricky Gillespie's office number on the mobile D.I. Hardy gave you? And fucking Claire, oh, and now you're piping up, are you? Had a little peek at my phone, did you? Thanks for that, mate. I love this. She is really trying to be salty at the cop for not being, like, loyal to her. Bitch, what did you think this was? Like, for real. She's a cop. You knew that. You're the idiot who kept tripping up around her constantly. Why did you ever trust her? Why did you ever think that was the like, I think what it was, because she says something at one point to Ellie in the previous episode about how, like, I don't want my life to be defined by this. I think she's genuinely trying to get more of a sense of normalcy back to her life, and she's just clinging to the absolute wrong person for it, because there were no other options. She wasn't being allowed to go out into the world and see friends, you know? So I guess that's why, but there's just a sense to it that I find so hilarious of genuine betrayal that she's feeling. And I'm like, you are an idiot if you ever thought that she wasn't actively investigating you, dude. Like, what? Where's your head? So eventually, we finally get the real story. And Ellie says, did her father send you the bluebell, Ricky? And Claire stops dead in this way that signals clearly that's what happened. And finally, they get Lee to crack. Because I love it. Alec calls up Lee and tells him, oh, she handed in this piece of evidence, and she didn't even ask for a lawyer. She came to me. You guys haven't had a falling out, have you? Oh my God, I love Alec when he's being devious. It's so good. So they finally get him in there and they crack him. I get it. When you're in love, you think it's all encompassing. It's going to last forever, but you really can't trust anyone. Not even the people you love. And ultimately, we're all alone. And you can see Ellie being very upset and not really like wanting to hear this right now. But this does work on Lee at this moment. So he gets to him ultimately by basically saying, I know you must be really tired of lying, and this is your actual last chance. So here's what we find out. Lisa Newberry, 19, super hot, and both Lee and Ricky had the hots for her. Unfortunately, anybody who has ever been a hot female 19-year-old knows exactly the kind of older men scum that would have fucked you if you had shown any willingness at all. The fact that one of them is her uncle, notwithstanding, doesn't matter. Men are scum. They just are. It's just a fact. So, they both want to bang her, and it makes so much like sense how angry he gets when Ellie asks him, did you have a crush on her? I think was like the phrasing she used. I'm sorry, I had to ask. And he says, no, you didn't. I'm like, she definitely did. And I think that she was like, right. And she was right. Because he reacts really strongly to her, and he reacts really strongly to Lisa when she suggests this also. So we go into this flashback. Lisa is looking outside with Lee at the boy who we learned last episode had inherited the business that was cropping up and who had been stalking her. And Lee asks her where Pippa is. She says asleep. He says, no, bring her over. You can both stay here till he's gone. And you can see Lisa smile at him in this way that feels really significant. It feels that there has been something building between the two of them. It feels like she senses that this is the night that something is actually going to happen between the two of them. I would like to reiterate that the actor who plays Lee Ashworth is hot as fuck. So I don't blame this bitch at all for wanting to fuck him, but I blame him a lot for fucking her. He can want to all he wants. But she's a fucking child. And he is married? I don't even think they're married, are they? Boyfriend? Girlfriend? It doesn't feel like strong enough because they have this weird bond that's like beyond, but regardless, he's in a serious relationship already. And Lee goes outside and confronts this kid and decks him across the face. Get back to burning animals. And this kid, he says, final warning, stay away from her. The kid says, but I love her. And he says, get over it or I'll break your leg. Go on. And he goes inside and he's got blood on his shirt from punching this kid in the face. Look, this dude is hot already. And then he goes out there and punches the man who's been stalking you. Yeah, man. Like, Lisa, I feel you, girl. I would have wanted to fuck him instantly. I mean, come on. There's nothing like a dude who is standing up for you and is on your side. But a guy who's standing up for you on your side, plus gets a teeny tiny bit violent and is already super hot. That's a fucking dangerous mixture. So, yeah, she comes downstairs. You hit him. Yeah, well, it's quicker than talking. He did get a bit of a nosebleed, though. And she says, oh, you've got blood on your shirt. And it's a moment of real, like, oh, this is happening, isn't it? It's happening. It's happening. And sure enough, we cut to the two of them banging and Ricky outside watching them. And Ricky just apparently just like chilled outside for 15 minutes watching the two of them having sex, which rightfully she kind of calls him out on as being like a really creepy old man. And there's a sense to it of definite envy. You know, he tries to be like, I trusted you to look after her. That's not what it is. You wanted to fuck her and you're mad that Lee is getting to fuck her. And you feel scummy because you want to fuck her and you're her uncle. And there it is. I have to tell you guys that I found it really funny that she is still pretty much fully clothed. I don't know if she still had her panties on. They may have just taken those off or they may have just pulled them to the side. But she's like dressed and Lee is buck-ass naked when he busts in. And yeah, he says, I've been out there the last 15 minutes. I've seen every position. And she calls him a dirty bastard. I've seen you looking. You're just pissed off that I fucked him instead of you. He decks her across the face, climbs on top of her, grabs her by the head, and smashes her head into the floor. Once. He just does it once. And that's enough. And then when he stands up and realizes what he did, he immediately is like, oh, well, your DNA is all over her. You were fucking her, and this is your house. So, I certainly didn't kill her. You killed her. And he's even setting this up as he's talking to the little girl later on. Pippa is on the stairs when Claire gets home. And he tells her, Lee hurt Lisa pretty badly. He's obviously already setting this up. So Claire, he does have Rohypnol in his hip flask. He is such a scumbag. I swear to God, this guy is really gross. And he knows that, and he tells her to give it to his daughter, which, like, dude, think. Because what she tells him, which is that she started choking and died, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen to a child who ingests what's meant for an adult, the amount of it. It could happen. Like, he doesn't even consider that. But what Claire is doing is drugging this little girl so that she won't struggle when she sends Lee upstairs to kill her. And Claire holds on to the flask, and when she tells Rick what happened, she also informs him, and what happened in quotes, like her version, she tells him that she has the flask in the woods, buried somewhere that she knows where to find it, and that if he ever tries to pull any of this down on the two of them, she will turn that into the authorities so that they know that traces of what killed Pippa are in it, and also that his DNA is on it. And I don't think that that would have even worked. I'm not even sure that she means I think she's saying what she needs to get him to fall in line, but I think that she knows that this probably wouldn't work. Doesn't matter though, because it's enough to shut him the fuck up. And I really love when they eventually confront him later. And by they, I mean Alec and Ellie. And he tries to do a no comment. Alec is disgusted and is like, I thought I had failed you. This almost killed me. Literally, almost took my life. And you're going to sit there and no comment me? Are you fucking for real right now? And I sort of appreciated that Ricky at least has the decency to be ashamed of that. And it does sort of crack him. So he finally is like, I got my punishment. And he tells them the rest of what happened. And when they go to Claire, and she explains the final bits about how she kept Ricky from doing anything, it leads to all of them being arrested and Alec going off with the file by himself and bursting into tears alone in an interrogation room in a scene that I thought was really moving. As much as I didn't care about the Sandbrook case, his acting is so good. And this release of emotion here, it just makes a lot of sense. Even if you don't know exactly what is he crying about. Is it relief? Is it like rage at the wasted energy and time? It doesn't matter. It just still works, you know? So that's the end of the season pretty much. And like I said, there's a moment where it looks like he's going to leave town. I'm certain that he does not. But I do really love when Ellie thinks that she's going to be saying goodbye to him and he's trying to be nice to her. And she's like, no, don't be nice to me. That's not how it works. And she holds out a hand and he kind of makes fun of the fact that she just wants to shake hands. And she's like, well, yeah, I'm not hugging you. And I just really enjoyed that she's firmly like, this is what our relationship is. And you better just acknowledge that. So, all right. I'm going to wrap. Thank you guys again so much for commissioning this. I really, as much as I didn't love this season, I'm really glad that you did commission it because I want to know what happened with Joe. And at least that felt like it was satisfying in the end, despite the way it turned out, weirdly. And I agree with y'all that probably season 3 wasn't necessary. So good call on that. Good looking out. And again, thank you very much to Lindsey for this one specifically. And I hope that y'all have enjoyed the coverage. So until some other time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.